National Forest should be clear-cut continues. The U.S. Forest Service has gone ahead with plans to cut hardwoods in the Shawnee at Pope County. As Jonathan Clark reports, this has met with the wrath of environmentalists.
I know what was here. Now this is a green priority for bear, it's not endangered, but these woods have quite a few
Where the song once said peace, they substituted the word trees. All they were saying was give trees a chance. But they were a little bit too late to give these trees a chance. The trees were cut and loaded and headed for a mill in Kentucky.
These beautiful oaks are being used to make newspaper and things like that.
For months, the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists has been fighting against clear-cutting in the Shawnee Forest. Clear-cutting involves harvesting all hardwoods and select softwoods. To this point, they had made some progress. A short while back, the Forest Service decided it would limit its clear-cutting. But the Forest Service has already contracted out for certain clear cuts, including this 20-acre cut in Pope County. The contract was with the West Vaco paper manufacturer. Thursday, it sent a team to take the trees out. Today, that team was met by the environmentalists.
We're not here to fight.
Is these 25 acres worth all this to your reputation in the Forest Service?
The argument is over whether the Forest Service is acting in good faith. That depends on which side you ask. According to the environmentalists, the Forest Service isn't holding up its end of the deal by cutting down trees before an appeals process is complete.
We intend to honor that contract, including the clear-cutting block and the other pine thinning blocks.
After some lumber had been moved out, each side exchanged ideas, but after today's cut, the concerned environmentalists are short on talk. They promise to see the government in court. From Pope County, Jonathan Clark, News.
Terrible opposition from environmental groups. That issue is the destruction of the habitat of many endangered species. As Jonathan Clark reports tonight, officials expressed their views during a fact-finding trip through the forest today.
This was the scene in September inside the Shawnee National Forest. Environmentalists scorning a timber company for clear-cutting, that is, removing all of the hardwoods from a forest. The environmentalists invited Forest Service representatives out to some recent clear cuts to show where erosion has occurred.
Others have endorsed because it permits some clear cutting of trees. Today, foresters invited members of the group to see several clear cuts, but the arguments continued. Ernie Mitchell reports.
Clear-cutting sections of trees is an issue pitting environmentalists against loggers, against forestry officials, and in this case, against other conservation groups. ACE says clear-cutting leads to erosion and a mess, but foresters say it allows hardwood trees to regenerate.
Look, you will see vegetation still coming up already and sprouting, and that will, of course, we will have a lot of these that will sprout and vegetation will occur.
What are you supposed to be doing? What is your job?
This is not the creek.
This is a rock stream.
Is this what you are supposed to be doing?
I don't understand the question.
You're supposed to be preventing soil erosion and protecting water quality.
Yes, if you look up the slopes, you'll see litter across the slope, you'll see water bars that as we get into our heavy rains, it's not going to move this off-site.
The U.S. Forest Service recently approved timber cutting contracts for 2 areas of the Shawnee, and as Steve Kosted reports now, the move has rekindled a burning controversy.
Around here. Go on, go inside your building. Get in there, scat, right. That's my attitude.
Tempers are once again flaring over what many call a never-ending battle, the fight to save the hardwoods of the Shawnee National Forest.
I like trees and they like me. All we're saying is let us be.
These representatives of ACE, the Association of Concerned Environmentalists, are using such ambush tactics, opposing the latest Forest Service actions to cut timber from the Town Hall region of the Shawnee National Forest.
You already promised, Gary Wilson, you're going to get in here before the EA was ever done. Now get out.
That's unacceptable. The public has already spoken. We represent thousands of people who are against clear cutting under any name.
ACE leaders are appealing the Town Hall timber sale, hoping to stop cutting that could begin as early as next week.
No, not one more acre will be sacrificed. Not one more songbird's habitat will be destroyed. Not one more blooming orchid's habitat will be destroyed.
They have basically the same concerns that I do and that we do as an agency.
Forest Service officials say their latest environmental evaluations and tree cutting plans are established to ensure the forest will last for generations to come.
I think we have responded to that by moving away from clear cutting.
However, radicals disagree.
This is not a selective cut at Town Hall. It's a group selection cut. Openings from 1/4 to 2 acres in size with all the big trees cut out in between.
The Forest Service now has up to 10 days to respond to the appeal. Whether or not they win this war, environmentalists say they'll continue fighting the battle to save the Shawnee National Forest. In Murfreesboro, Steve Costad, News 3.
Forest is escalating. Today, a man who calls himself an earth firster climbed a tree marked to be cut down in the Trail of Tears State Forest in southern Illinois. Richard Kennecke reports the man didn't stay in the tree very long, but says he made his point.
His name is John Wallace, a 29-year-old landscape designer from Waterloo, Illinois. And for several hours this morning, he was a tree sitter in the Trail of Tears State Forest.
How long do you intend to stay up there?
I don't know. How long does East Perry plan to cut in my forest?
Wallace sits 45 feet off the ground in a tree marked for harvest. The East Perry Lumber Company is removing 25% of the mature, diseased, and damaged trees from 200 acres.
One selective cut of timber is not going to destroy the Trail of Tears forest. It's called management of our forest resources.
No!
Wallace shouted no every time a tree crashed to the ground.
Earth First is not an organization and there are no memberships, but those who consider themselves Earth Firsters feel there is no compromise when it comes to Mother Earth.
Local timber harvesting. Early this morning, protesters blocked 2 main entrances to the Trail of Tears State Forest. The group is attempting to halt logging in the area. They claim the timber cutting company is violating the terms of its contract. Stephanie Catino has more.
East Perry from Cape Girardeau is stripping a rare, priceless area in the Trail of Tears State Forest.
That's the feeling of these Earth Firsters, who are calling themselves the Red Ribbon Trail Defense Team. Their goal is to stop what they call unnecessary timber cutting.
After being told arrest was imminent.
What kind of statement do you think you've made this morning? I don't know, but I wasn't right then.
But more and more people are getting more fed up with the lies that our government agencies are telling us about our public land.
Either pack up and move on, or we're going to make an arrest.
At the other entrance, protesters face the same situation, saying they can't fight the fight from jail. All but 3 walk away.
And a scraping, they'll be raping, and a scraping, they'll be raping, and a scraping when they come.
It's butchery. It's butchery. It's not even educated timbering. They went in there and they butchered the forest.
Even as the Earth Firsters are being led away, the tree harvest continues. Production stops for only 2 hours. East Perry Lumber Company will complete their harvest of 954 trees tomorrow, then move on to another site in the forest. In response to Earth First criticisms that they're destroying the land, company rep says their harvest is sound.
This is sound silvicultural harvesting techniques that are being used. There's nothing wrong with cutting out here.
The early morning picket line, protest, and subsequent arrest turned out to be only a minor inconvenience for East Perry Lumber Company. They continued harvesting trees all day.
Environmental group Earth First descended on the Forest Service office in Harrisburg to demand a halt to harvesting. Andy Alcock has that story.
It started out friendly as Tom Haggerty from the U.S. Forest Service came out to greet protesters from the environmental group Earth First.
I wanted to say hi and welcome you folks and see what we can do for you.
However, the mood quickly became confrontational.
I'm an Indiana bat, and I'm losing my home. You've been cutting my home.
At issue is timber harvesting in the Shawnee National Forest. Earth First wants it completely stopped.
Stop the cutting now!
That's it.
Stop the cutting now! Stop the cutting now!
Moratorium now. Be loud. We can do it outside, but we can't do it here.
I mean, you're cutting down these trees, and people up north, even a couple hours from here, don't even know what a real forest is like because of what's been happening so far.
That's not in keeping with the forest plan, and as I told them, I thought not in keeping with a practical point of view toward the use of the forest.
Out west, Earth First members have been accused of setting booby traps or spikes in trees marked for harvest. That has caused injury and even death to lumberjacks. Today, the protesters refuse to sit down and meet with the Forest Service in the future. They say they've been down that road before.
This is sort of an escalation of our tactics, and, you know, how long do we have to escalate it until they listen to us?
Does that mean spiking trees?
Oh, no. What, you know, what individuals do out in the community is their own business.
It's an entertaining way for people to bring their message to the Forest Service. I wish they'd accepted our invitation to sit down and talk, but that doesn't appear to be in the cards.
Earth First members have not formulated a clear strategy to achieve their goals. However, they say they will continue to protest in some form until they get what they want. In Harrisburg, Andy Elcock, News 3.
National Forest. And local environmentalists promised to step up their efforts to force the Forest Service to halt the practice of selective cutting, which they contend is not much different from clear cutting. Andy Alcock has more.
Last spring, the U.S. Forest Service suspended plans to clear-cut the Cripps Bend and Fairview areas of the Shawnee National Forest after race protested. The Forest Service has now decided to selectively harvest those two areas.
Going from clear cutting to group selection, we're going to be able to maintain and repair the road system out there. We're going to be improving wildlife habitat diversity.
Recently, the Town Hall region of the Shawnee underwent a selective cut. According to race member Joe Glisson, the 1 or 2 acre areas cleared away amount to nothing more than a small or patch clear cut.
We went to Town Hall and looked at it, and we've got photographic evidence of it. A lot of people have been out there. It is nothing but small clear cuts. Everything that is merchantable is taken out, and everything else is just laid down to rot.
Race members are especially upset with plans to cut back here in the Fairview area of the Shawnee. The Forest Service, in their own environmental assessment of Fairview, said the area was too fragile for even horseback riding or camping. But now they plan to allow timber harvesting here.
It's pretty disgusting to see the United States government resort to deceptive tactics just to enrich a few greedy resource extractors, but that's exactly what they're doing.
For the most part, we're not harvesting on the most fragile soils, and the others where we are, we're instituting mitigating measures to protect those soils.
Timber harvesting is scheduled to begin in the Fairview and Cripps Bend areas as soon as mid-April. Race members hope to stop the cutting by taking the issue to court. In Jackson County.
Bob Walters today visited the rendezvous outside Pomona.
Attention must be focused on the central hardwoods of the Shawnee, the Mark Twain, and the Hoosier National Forests. We immediately demand a moratorium on all logging of public lands.
Earth First members are spending the weekend roughing it in the wilderness outside Pomona. They're conducting workshops on what they can do to prevent the destruction of Southern Illinois National Forest. Public know they're not a bunch of loud radicals, only citizens concerned about what's happening to the forests. This weekend also marked the establishment of the Shawnee Earth First organization, an organization that says they'll react peacefully to big business and corporations that they say are destroying forests like these and the animals that are living here. Members say a better title for the rendezvous is the Mud Offensive. Although the weather is not great for camping, the conditions slow down the timber harvest. Tomorrow the group will move to the Fairview Woodlands area to begin an offensive. Cutting is scheduled to begin there next week.
We're drawing the line in the Shawnee. Right on. And we're going to hold the line at Fairview Woodlands, the very first place the Forest Service wants to cut, April 15th.
Shawnee National Forest.
Wearing tie-dyed clothes, long hair, and singing protest songs, it was like something from the 1960s. But it wasn't just for fun. These are environmentalists. Their goal to keep timber harvesters out of the Shawnee Forest. This area called Fairview Woodlands is scheduled for selective cutting April 15th.
The habitat at Fairview represents all the areas that they want to sacrifice on the forest this spring. Cripps Bend, Otter Salvage, all the way around Lake Kincaid, McCormick Hill, Hayes Bay around Belsmith Springs, Berner Hill in Alexander County. One cutting leads to another in the Forest Service's minds.
In protest of the timber harvesting, hundreds of environmentalists camped out at Fairview this weekend. They came from as far away as the East Coast, Wisconsin, Iowa, and upstate Illinois.
There are thousands of people who don't want our national forest to be cut and sacrificed. It's only 7% of Illinois' 4.5 million acres of woodlands. We've got plenty of timber opportunities. We don't have plenty of century-old hardwood habitat opportunities to pass on to the next generation.
Every day we seem to read about another environmental problem, oil spills. So hopefully when kids get together and with adults, maybe we can start saving nature instead of hurting it all the time.
But the area is already changing. A 6-foot wide access road now cuts through the forest, and paint splotches mark the trees that are going to be harvested.
I think it's a disgrace. I think it's a disgrace to people. I think it's a disgrace to the land. I think it's a disgrace to the world.
Meanwhile, selective cutting at Fairview is scheduled to begin April 15th. Johnette Warwick, Newsbeat 6, Jackson County, Illinois.
Environmentalists say even selective tree cutting will cost the Shawnee 3,600 acres every year.
Defending the sale to East Perry Timber Company.
Well, this afternoon, Magistrate Philip Frazier made his recommendation. He says the environmentalists failed to make their point, thus no case. Johnny Warwick reports.
Some of the environmentalists left the courthouse in tears. Others left disappointed, but not down for the count.
It's imperative now that we hire an attorney and get someone in here who can explain it well. It was totally our fault that we lost. The case is there, and simply the fact that a couple of boys from out in the woods tried to argue it's the reason we lost it.
It took 11 hours of testimony and 2 hours of deliberation for Magistrate Philip Frazier to decide that the environmentalists failed to make their case.
The Fairview environmental group Earth First are preparing for the decision. They've pitched their tents at the entrance to the forest and plan to rally hundreds of people to stop the cutting.
A lot of people here are deeply committed to doing whatever they have to do to make the point that Fairview woodlands mustn't be sacrificed. And we're not here for a confrontation. We're here for public education. We're here to maintain a watch. And hopefully that will be good enough.
A handful of protesters from St. Louis and Toronto have given up their jobs to go on the watch and are willing to put a lot more on the line.
Do you see yourself sitting out here a week, month, 2 months from now if need be?
If need be. This is an important area, and we have to let those in control know that we're willing to make the sacrifice, and we're willing to stand firm.
It's impossible to stop the harvest, including climbing trees when they're about to be cut.
That's exactly what we're planning, is to stay up there. They can't get us out.
Carrying banners, members of Earth First stormed the Harrisburg office, singing and shouting in protest of the timber harvest in the Fairview area of the Shawnee. Group leader Jan Thomas says the cutting will affect future generations and the environment.
Shawnee should be reserved for wildlife habitat, for our children's heritage, for research opportunities, horseback riding. There's plenty of ways to manage a forest without cutting it down.
A representative from the Forest Service tried to let the group voice their opinions, but the situation got out of hand. The group was then asked to leave and was escorted from the building. Tom Haggerty of the Forest Service says his only reaction to the protest is plain disgust and refused to comment on camera.
Marked their 46th day in the Fairview section of the Shawnee National Forest today. Members awoke this morning expecting to be forced out of the camp, but as Keith Landry reports, they're still waiting.
Earth First environmentalists expected their 46th day in the Shawnee National Forest to be the most memorable. They waited all day for Jackson County officials to try to make them leave the forest, but it didn't happen. Yesterday, the U.S. Forest Service gave the group until 10:45 this morning to pack up their camp and leave or face arrest.
Sure, obviously they're going to come in and try and remove us. We have a number of people coming in. There's going to be a rally up top, a number of people discussing their expressing their dissatisfaction with what's going on here.
Last week, a federal judge ruled that the East Perry Lumber Company can start harvesting timber as soon as Monday, but Earth First plans to stay.
Shawnee Earth First leaders say they've talked to their demonstrators about the possibility of being arrested, and many of them have attained lawyers and are ready to post bail. Most people here say they don't want to go to jail, but they're prepared to.
Earth First members say even if they are arrested, it would only be round one in their battle.
We're not going to let all of our main people be taken out in the first day, in the first wave of events. This is just the beginning. Just because they showed up here with a closure notice, we aren't going away that easily. It would be silly to have sat here for 46 days to walk away just because they said, please go away.
Earth First protesters say the Forest Service order did not inform them of their right to appeal the eviction. They took their concerns to Congressman Glenn Pashard this afternoon, reminding him not to ignore their 9,000 supporters. Attempts to contact the Forest Service were unsuccessful, so there is no indication when they might remove the protesters.
One person was arrested, and as Kathy
At
Sweeney...
Fairview refused to make it easy. One chained himself to the access gate blocking the timber sale area. Another sat down in front of a bulldozer.
I think that, you know, people need to actually start putting their bodies between the equipment and the environment they're trying to protect. So in my own way, for me, it's as most as I can do, and I believe it is having an effect.
But the Forest Service responded by writing tickets. One for interfering with a Forest Service official, another for blocking a needed road. Then they moved in.
Where's first?
It was almost eerie that minutes after the showdown began, it started to rain. The one thing Earth Firsters thought would end the confrontation. It wasn't enough.
How can you let them go out there if there's people in the woods? They could injure those people.
Despite warnings that more protesters were hidden in the Forest Service pressed on. But environmentalists admit only a temporary defeat.
We've lost this battle.
We've got
lost
waves
the
of
top the
people.
road, but there's waves of people coming back into this forest, and this war will go on.
I wouldn't say it's a victory. I'd say, you know, we're trying to do what we're ordered by Congress to do, and that's maintain the forest and manage them.
John Ed Warwick, Newsbeat 6, Jackson County, Illinois.
For an emergency motion that would have blocked tree cutting in the Shawnee Forest. Race was appealing a similar decision by Southern Illinois Federal District Judge James Foreman last month. Well, the battle at the Shawnee Forest Fairview timber sale area is not over. A check of the site today revealed a large number of environmentalists still at the scene, and more are moving in. Blockades have been set up to keep bulldozers out. An old car is buried at the front of the Fairview access road. Crosses bearing the names of trees that are to be cut down line the path into the forest. Members of Earth First battled the Forest Service and lost last Wednesday when they tried to keep timber harvesters out. 2 were ticketed, 1 arrested. Meanwhile, some 20 miles northwest of Fairview, another controversy is brewing. The Forest Service plans to clear-cut 2 areas surrounding Murfreesboro's popular Lake Kincaid.
Record harvest level, 12 million board feet. The average over that 10 years was 4.5 million a year. They're going to take that much out of Kincaid in 1 year, just that in itself.
Yes, some people, I'm sure, will consider it to be ugly. The way that these stands are located and designed, they are out of the scene area. In other words, you will not see them from Kincaid Lake, and they're also away from the roads.
The planned Lake Kincaid timber sale is the largest in Shawnee Forest history. 5,000 acres are up for sale. 900 acres will be cut, 90 acres clear-cut.
80 days in their struggle to save the hardwoods. As Bob Walters reports, a confrontation with the environmental group didn't stop loggers from getting to work.
Earth Firster John Wallace spent his 30th birthday being removed from a logging skidder with a blowtorch by Forest Service officials. Earlier in the day, before he was arrested, John told us he wasn't sure, but he thought today's confrontation might get violent.
I did see them wrestle some people. It wouldn't surprise me at all. It really wouldn't.
They got real aggressive real quick just because we wanted our banners. So they're hyped up. They're ready to get violent. We're nonviolent people. We've been stressing nonviolence since we've been here, and they're throwing people around.
Forest Service and law enforcement officials say they have no comment on Earth Firster's accusations of violence. Jackson County Sheriff Bill Kilquist asked protesters to move their cars and get out of the loggers' way.
Move or you'll be arrested.
I'm not here to be arrested. I'm here to resist.
Earth Firsters resisted as officials arrested several of the protesters and bulldozed their way into the woods to begin a day of cutting.
There's not much more you can do. They've gone to court. They tried every legal system that there is and every legal route to get this stopped.
This is something the people can stop if we stand together.
Even after today, Earth Firsters say the fight is not over. They say they'll continue to petition Congress and stage protests here at the gates of the Shawnee. Meanwhile, forest officials and loggers say they have a job to do, too. In the Shawnee National Forest, Bob...
Blowtorch. The protesters have been charged with criminal trespassing to state-supported property, and they've been taken to the Jackson County Jail.
We would prefer that it not go on like this, but the timber operator has purchased this sale. It's a legal sale, and we have a commitment to manage the national forests.
I think they're definitely very unreasonable. There's a lot of people that don't want this forest cut, and they're being real aggressive about it.
Loggers eventually cleared the road and moved in. They have about a month's work ahead of them removing pines from the timber sale area.
Forest rangers and police in the Shawnee National Forest. 6 protesters are under arrest.
Grant Weedy reports the confrontation began when rangers brought in bulldozers to repair roads and clear the way for timber cutting.
I'm going to ask you to please move out in front of the dozer. If you don't, you will be arrested. Yes, Bill. Okay. Listen to the people. Make your arrest.
When Earth Firsters refused to get out of the way of bulldozers, the police moved in.
Don't resist.
About a half dozen were arrested and taken to the Jackson County Jail. They've been charged with criminal trespassing to state-supported property.
Are you going to unlock yourself? I can't. Okay.
Another Earth Firster went even further by locking his head to a bulldozer.
Want an ambulance! We demand an ambulance! We demand an ambulance now! This is justice, people! Look at it! We demand...
Eventually, forest officials used a blowtorch to cut him loose. The Forest Service calls these arrests unfortunate, but necessary given the circumstances.
Certainly, we would prefer, you know, meeting people in visitor centers and managing timber like we always have. That would be preferable to what you have today with all of the people here.
Loggers are less diplomatic and say all this protesting is a bunch of nonsense.
I think it's a bunch of bull myself. These people have been here for 77 days or 80 days, whatever, you know. They've lost a battle.
Loggers say they have about a month's work ahead of them, removing pines from the timber sale area. They say they'll keep at it despite the resistance. In Jackson County, Grant Weedy, Heartland News.
The U.S. Court of Appeals in Chicago issued an injunction against the Fairview timber sale. That injunction stops all timber cutting. The ruling comes a day after loggers began working in the area. Environmentalists say they're happy.
30 days stay.
Yes. This is big. This sets national precedents. It's get these greedy corporations out of the people's forest today. For good.
Grant Weedy will have more on the injunction this evening on Heartland.
Bonding out of jail, environmentalists got the news. A U.S. appeals court in Chicago says cutting at the Fairview site will stop until environmentalists have their day in court and a judge rules on the case.
Ecstatic over the court's decision to rule for the stay, and we feel that it is a major victory for what is going on out here at Fairview.
National Forest to the highest court in the land. Yesterday, an appellate court in Chicago refused to extend a ban on timber harvesting in the Fairview area of the forest. As Bob Walters reports, members of the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists and Earth First are committed to keep logging trucks out of the Shawnee.
There were no chants, songs, shouts, or confrontations with the Forest Service or the logging company. Today's rally at Fairview was quiet compared to other protests to stop the cut. Despite the loss yesterday, the protesters unrolled a petition showing public support for their cause.
This is 11,000 people who have taken the time to sign this, put their name, address, and phone number so they can be contacted, telling the powers that be that they don't want any more commercial timber harvesting on the Shawnee National Forest.
The group says although it lost in court yesterday, it's not giving up. They say they'll take their arguments all the way to the Supreme Court.
It's a real long shot, like our lawyer Tom Bouchel says, you know. But you got to try. You got to keep trying.
That's the beauty of our system. We have a system that if we don't agree with different things, we can go right on up the ladder with it. I have no problem with them doing that.
The lift on the stay means East Perry can roll in and start cutting whenever they're ready. Protesters argue that by law, the road leading back to the cut is to be closed to all traffic during winter months. But the Forest Service is making an exception for East Perry.
The forest supervisor, Rod Sally, has said that it would be wrong for the public to go in there and look at those trees, but it's okay for the loggers to go in and cut them down.
The reason that East Perry can go in is because we do have a contract between the Forest Service and East Perry that has an awful lot of guidelines in it and a lot of standards.
Members say they won't camp out at the Fairview area like they did over the summer, but they will keep watch and demonstrate at the Forest Service office until they know if the Supreme Court will extend a ban on the cut. Burkhart says the environmentalists can do as they please, as long as they're not in the way when the logging trucks come rolling in.
The rally at Fairview began with environmentalists rolling out yard after yard of signatures. 11,000 people, they say, all calling for a halt to timber harvesting in the Shawnee forest.
They've got to listen to us. 11,000 people cannot be ignored.
We're trying to show, you know, Rod Sally and our politicians how many people are actually really against what's going on here.
The public needs to have more input in deciding how the forest is used. He wants the U.S. Forest Service to suspend below-cost cutting until April. That's when the Forest Service will allow the public to speak on the matter.
Regard to the desires of thousands of my constituents, I would hope that they would give us at least this much.
Oh, today is the day! Cancel Fairview timber sale today! We're right across the river from Fairview. Cancel it today, Chief.
Dale Robertson was in the heartland to observe a successful duck preservation program, but he was immediately confronted by environmentalists. Gwen Ellis has the story.
F. Dale Robertson, the head of the National Forest Service, landed in a hotbed of controversy this morning.
Hello, Rod.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Welcome. How you doing this morning?
Environmentalists waited at the Oakwood Bottoms Refuge to ask him to cancel all timber harvesting, including the Fairview timber sale.
This is not a settled issue by any means. The Forest Service is just going ahead with their plans, full speed ahead, regardless of what the people are saying.
The protesters stole the spotlight during a ceremony for a duck preservation program.
Cancel it today, Chief. Everyone is calling for cancellation. Everyone!
Robertson says he hasn't answered the 22-member Illinois congressional request to halt all timber sales until the public has a chance to comment on the new management program.
The people of Illinois want their public lands intact, and we're tired of this timber program and this timber beast mentality that's coming out of the National Forest.
Robertson met privately with representatives from the area's environmental groups. Though both sides are talking, his mind seems to be made up on the Fairview timber sale.
We did go to court, all the way to the Supreme Court on that, and it was determined it was a lawful sale, and so I think we're proceeding with that sale.
But not everyone here today was trying to protect the ducks. There were some people looking out for trees. Environmentalists trying to block timber harvesting in the Fairview section of the Shawnee took advantage of Robertson's visit.
They keep telling us that we have the opportunity to put in input here this spring, but in the meantime, they're going to continue with the cut as planned.
Robertson met with the demonstrators but wouldn't say if the Fairview timber sale would be put on hold. The protesters have congressional support now. Representative Glenn Pashard, Senator Paul Simon, and 20 other congressmen from the Illinois delegation signed a letter calling for timber harvesting in the Shawnee to be put on hold. Pashard's letter says the Shawnee National Forest lost more than $1 million in timber sales last year.
Members of Race and Earth First took the opportunity to ask Robertson when he will respond to a letter from legislators. It asked
Wallace locked his head to this bulldozer last September while trying to stop work on a logging road. He knew he'd one day wind up in court. After deliberating for more than 9 hours, a tired jury found Wallace guilty of disorderly conduct. Other environmentalists were found guilty as well. Renee Cook for criminal trespassing that September day, and Thomas Herb for obstructing a peace officer while shooting a video camera.
I think it was selective censorship on the part of the state.
I had hoped that the jurors would understand that we are working for the planet here. This isn't just a personal day in court. We have very deep feelings for the well-being and the continuance of life on this earth.
We still have a standing forest right now, and I think that all of us feel that that is the most important battle that we're fighting. We're determined to save our Shawnee National Forest.
The other environmentalist, Alan Morris, was found not guilty of criminal trespassing. Jurors say reaching the verdicts weren't easy.
Just took a lot of time dissecting everything and trying to come up with the right answer.
As the deadline for comment on the new Shawnee Forest Management Plan approaches,
environmentalists unrolled a petition with about 15,000 signatures on it, asking for a complete ban on timber harvesting. Members of Earth First and the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists have been collecting the signatures since 1988. Forest Service Manager Rod Salee says the signatures will become part of the record, part of the public comment, but that written letters carry more weight than petitions.
It expresses a viewpoint when we receive petitions. So they're not discarded, they are considered, but obviously it does not give us as much value as far as looking at the alternatives as a very specific letter might, addressing specific concerns or recommendations toward one of the alternatives.
Again today, environmentalists asked the Forest Service to cancel the timber sale at Fairview. Protesters spent much of last summer camping at the site to prevent harvesting there. Salee says even if the Forest Service revised its new plan to disallow harvesting, the Fairview cuts would still take place. He said Fairview would fall under the jurisdiction of the old plan.
Thanks to Earth First for their spirit, their colorful vitality, for jolting the citizens of Southern Illinois into awareness of the Forest Service's standard, disastrous policies.
The Forest Service is taking public comment on their management plan until August 15th. Forest Supervisor Rod Salee says the petitions will be taken into account when the government makes its final decision on the plan. Forest Service officials say they've received written comments from some 650 people so far. They say all concerns will be considered as they work toward approval of the plan.
Fred Harris says he's like many people in Harrisburg who care deeply about the Shawnee. He says locals feel like it's their backyard. Fred says all the protests can be a little intimidating.
We get the feeling sometimes we don't have that much control over what's going to happen.
The only responsible thing for you to do is to cancel Fairview at this point. And
the Forest Service says while some people voice their opinions louder than others, it hears all voices the same. In Harrisburg, Gwen Ellis.
Close to 50 people hiked 7 miles to the Fairview section of the forest in a Shawnee Freedom Walk. The demonstrators posted a closing notice of sorts in the Fairview section of the Shawnee, declaring the area off limits to bulldozers and chainsaws. Their gesture comes just days before the end of a public comment period on how to manage the forest. 6 local environmental groups at today's Freedom Walk say they want no timber harvesting in the Shawnee. Members of Greenpeace also attended the event and threw their support behind the cause as well. The U.S. Forest Service right now is backing a management plan that includes allowing more than 4 million board feet per year to be harvested.
Members of RACE, Earth First, and several other Earth-friendly groups rallied, saying they will save the Shawnee National Forest. The public comment period on how to manage the forest for the next 10 years ends Thursday.
What the Forest Service wants to do is fragment that Shawnee National Forest. Once they fragment it, then you're going to lose species and all sorts of other things. It needs to be intact and stay together.
Environmentalists then walk
for harvest in the forest. This week is the final week for public comment period of the Forest Service's proposed forest management plan.
For a public commentary on a new forest plan, and that's a bit premature. We don't need more forest law, we need more honest foresters.
To truly consider these comments, not to see them as, mere pieces of paper, and to shuffle them back and put them in some file.
And that bill applies to the existing timber sales at Fairview.
Well, there's just a lot of concerned people, and it's really good to see that people are, willing to come out here and spend a lot of time and walk 7 miles in the heat.
The people of Illinois, especially of Southern Illinois, and the surrounding area, are fed up with the management of the U.S. Forest Service. They have mismanaged our forests for too long.
They want to interrupt the canopy. We want to know! We want to know!
Environmentalists want to know why logging is being allowed in the Shawnee National Forest. Good evening, everyone. Neither armed officers nor morning rain dampened the spirits of protesters in the Shawnee today. Logging was set to begin at the Fairview site, and an angry group of environmentalists turned out, hoping to stop it. Jennifer Krause has more.
Close to 100 environmentalists showed up at the Fairview section of the Shawnee National Forest this morning, ready to protest and armed with a message.
We're out there. The battle does not stop here.
They started gathering at the entrance around 7 a.m., and by 7:30, several people had already been arrested.
They were twisting my arm and twisting my head and trying to make me walk out of the way, but I made them carry me out.
In all, 16 people were taken into custody. Some were transported to the Jackson County Jail, but most were released on their own recognizance.
Some of them have signed agreements to, in exchange for not being taken down to the station, sign an agreement that they'll leave and not come back.
There were protesters of all ages, and even Congressman Glenn Pichard showed up to help keep the peace.
I felt that I shouldn't stand on the sidelines. I felt that I should come out here this morning because, after all, I didn't want anybody to get hurt, and I thought if I could make any difference in assuring that that didn't happen, then I should be here.
Rain and tension filled the air for much of the morning, and then there was a downpour of emotion when an ambulance arrived on the scene.
What's going on? Come on, answer. You need to answer some questions here. Ask her a question. I heard screaming earlier. You are in charge here. What's going on? Go back in.
Apparently, a male protester who managed to get to the actual timber site was hit by a truck owned by the logging company, East Perry Lumber of Missouri. By 9:30, only a handful of protesters remained on the front lines in the pouring rain. Meanwhile, down the road at the actual logging site, officials say operations had to be stopped because of the weather. It should take the East Perry Company 3 to 4 weeks to clear the site, and protesters say they'll fight the harvest every step of the way.
We're going to monitor everything that goes on. We're going to make it as unpleasant for them as we possibly can.
It's not a lost cause until it's all gone. We'll be here till the end.
In the Shawnee National Forest, Jennifer Krause, News 3.
Another explosive confrontation in the Shawnee National Forest today. Good afternoon. Loggers who came to cut down trees at the long-embattled Fairview timber area were met by hundreds of protesters. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies, along with forest rangers, arrested about 12 of the protesters who sat down in front of East Perry logging trucks. Congressman Glenn Pichard, who was also at the forest when the loggers arrived, asked East Perry to reconsider the cuts to no avail. Now, one man was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital in Murfreesboro, but it is not known if he was a protester or the nature or extent of his injury.
He's at the long embattled Fairview area. Loggers were met by a crowd of environmentalists and a congressman who tried to stop them. John Dvork was there.
It was a scene reminiscent of last summer. At 7:30, East Perry Lumber Company arrived to cut the trees at Fairview, and environmentalists tried to stop them. Jackson County authorities arrested 12 protesters who refused to get out of the way of logging trucks. Among them, Joe Glisson, head of the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists, and Jan Wilder Thomas, the leader of Earth First. Illinois Congressman Glenn Pichard was also on the scene, trying to persuade East Perry to wait on legislation now being considered in the U.S. Senate.
We passed language out of the House that would have prohibited this today. It's just unfortunate that it wasn't considered in the Senate and won't be considered in the conference until September.
They've asked us to wait, a number of times. They've asked us to wait. We waited for the law cases. We waited for them to appeal to the Supreme Court. We waited for the 15th. We've been waiting and waiting. We got to start sooner or later.
But once in the forest, it didn't get easier for East Perry or the Forest Service. Numerous environmentalists were hiding among the trees. One protester claimed he was hit by a logging truck.
He claimed that he was hit by a pickup truck. East Perry claims they did not hit anyone.
The protester was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital by ambulance.
We're here to be nonviolent, but to speak out as citizens of Jackson County in the United States. And those of you who have the commitment, you best be ready to go to jail.
People arrested, one claimed to be injured, as more than 100 demonstrators tried to block logging in the Fairview Heights area of the Shawnee. The protesters tried to stop equipment from the East Perry Lumber Company from entering the planned logging site to begin cutting trees.
Environmentalists say this fight isn't over yet.
We're going to hit you at every angle, and we are. You know, we are not giving up. The people are fed up with this nonsense.
Near Murfreesboro, Gwen Ellis, Heartland.
This is our forest, and we don't want to cut.
How long have you been involved with this?
Been involved from the very start, and I'm going to stay with it to the end until this is over.
Others just found the group's enthusiasm contagious.
But then I also realized the Shawnee forest was getting cut up, and I found out that some of the most important people around were trying to stop it, and I just tried to help them by joining with them.
Now, saving the forest is an emotional and personal issue to people like Jan Wilder Thomas, and some of the protesters put themselves in danger by planting themselves in front of logging trucks.
We have 1/10 of 1% of the state preserved from industrial use.
Tonight Report, I'm Michelle Durfee. The timber company started cutting down the trees yesterday, but could not remove them because of the weather. As Mike Kirsch reports, protesters remain on the site and are as vocal as ever about the trees being cut down.
Despite the tears and disappointment of environmental activists, a Missouri timber company today trucked tons of hardwood out of the Shawnee National Forest.
They belong to us, not to those people who are taking them away to do God knows what with them. And they belong to everybody, including people like this child right here who will never get to see them because they're gone.
Several U.S. Forest Service rangers continue to guard the entrance to the timber mill.
They are harassing these people. They're videotaping everyone always. They're treating us as criminals. All we are concerned citizens.
3-year-old Chris Van Dalen showed abrasions and a broken hand allegedly caused by Brian Understall of the East Perry Lumber Company. Van Dalen admits he was in the closed-off area of the forest when the alleged incident occurred.
Was fully stopped. At a point, I was under the vehicle. The truck was stopped. Seconds later, the man decided to move the truck forward. He had full knowledge of my presence there.
Like in the Shawnee National Forest today. Live. Vital. Apple juice and vegetable juice will be the only things 4 group members will consume until logging in the Shawnee is over 3 weeks from now. The environmentalists are encouraging more people to join them.
Pledge a day to fast for Fairview. This is a hunger strike, and we mean business. We want to get the national laws changed because of what they're doing to Fairview.
It's an atrocity, and we must stop it immediately, and we can no longer continue our lives like nothing is wrong. There's a major problem here, and by refusing to eat, maybe we can draw national attention to it, but we need more people.
The group is camped a quarter-mile down the road from the Fairview area of the Shawnee. U.S. Forest Service officials are still guarding the site.
These are some of the images we've seen of clear-cutting underway in the Shawnee National Forest. But in spite of the protests, the business at hand for the East Perry Lumber Company continues. Truckloads of trees harvested from the Fairview area continue to make their way to the company's plant in Frona.
Protests over logging in the Shawnee National Forest continue today, but this time environmentalists tried a different approach. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There were more than a dozen arrests today in Union County as environmentalists tried once again to stop timber harvesting in the Shawnee Forest. The protesters, it seems, are as committed to the cause as ever. As Dan Nat'l reports, 2 protesters today even laid their necks on the line, literally.
Once again, local environmentalists chained themselves to logging equipment to protest timber harvesting in the Shawnee National Forest. It happened this afternoon in Union County. 2 of the protesters locked themselves to logging trucks that had been stopped by other protesters at the intersection of Illinois 127 and 146 near Jonesboro.
There's been protests all along. The Congress has asked them to stop. They know that they've got, this is the last chance they can get to get these logs out. We're going to stop them. We're going to be in the way every step of the way.
It took authorities around 3 hours to cut the 2 loose because they had used bicycle locks, and conventional bolt cutters just wouldn't do the trick. After they were cut loose, authorities quickly arrested them. Meanwhile, protesters say the arrests today won't slow them down.
If you're a pain in the butt enough, you know, the next thing they'll have to do is have police escorts getting the trucks out of there, and they don't want to do that. And then we'll just jump out of the trees and chain ourselves on anyways.
In all, 13 protesters were hauled away to the Jackson County Jail, all charged with mob action, the 2 charged with unlawful constraint.
Following 2 nights in the Jackson County Jail, the environmentalists arrived at the Union County Courthouse this morning in handcuffs. All were arrested Saturday for allegedly blockading 6 logging trucks with the East Perry Lumber Company at the intersection of Route 127 and 146.
2 of the individuals that were there at that time then chained themselves to the undercarriage of those trucks and generally stopped traffic at that intersection for an hour or more, and the arrests were made subsequent to those actions.
Most of the protesters are charged with conspiracy for unlawful restraint, a felony, plus mob action. Judge Dee Dee Bigler set bond for 11 of the protesters at $2,500. The 2 charged with locking their heads to a truck are at $5,000.
I don't think there's anybody in this particular county or all of Southern Illinois that is not sympathetic to some extent with the position that they're taking, but this is the wrong way to go about it.
If convicted, the environmentalists could get up to 3 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, but the state's attorney says that's very unlikely.
More likely than not, these individuals are looking at some type of probation, fines, and some other penalties besides prison time. We're not looking at putting these individuals in the Department of Corrections.
For those who can't post bond, it's back to jail.
Protesters formed a circle of unity today at the entrance to the Fairview site of the Shawnee National Forest. The demonstration was organized to mourn the loss of the hardwood trees that have been harvested from the Fairview section. And now that most of the trees have been removed from Fairview, environmentalists say they're gearing up to block another timber sale, this one in the Cripps Bend section of the forest.
The Forest Service is going to have to expect to come out with their 24 armed guards, or how many they have, we're not even sure. And they're going to have to close the area off, and they're going to have to deal with people.
Environmentalists are asking federal officials to stop the Cripps Bend timber sale. They say studies will show how the sale will fragment the forest and threaten migrating songbirds. And they say they don't want to see any more trees cut down in the Shawnee.
We all love those big, beautiful trees. We will never again in our lifetime see those trees. They're gone. They're carted off in a truck. They're dead carcasses.
News crews into the site to take a look around. Congressman Glenn Pichard was instrumental in organizing the tour of the harvest of pine and hardwoods in Jackson County, Illinois. 3 of the 6 timber cut areas showed about an acre at each site to be clear of trees.
The purpose of this cut is to regenerate the forest here. These were bigger trees, older trees, about 100 years old. And purpose of a group selection cut is to open up the canopy, let a lot of light get into the forest floor, allow the small trees that are existing in the forest floor to take off and fill in the group that was closed over.
The previous Shawnee National Forest plan says up to 2 acres of trees can be harvested in one spot. Fairview falls under that plan, but a Shawnee management plan that starts next year pulls back the number of acres to 3/5 of an acre. Congressman Pichard feels all timber sales made under the old plan, like Fairview, should be refigured to the new standard. Pichard says the cuts by East Perry Lumber Company at Fairview are just too big.
Because it seems to me that, yes, East Perry legally has the right, apparently, unless the Congress can pass pending legislation, to go ahead and cut these things. But they shouldn't.
Paul Simon introduced an amendment to the 1992 Interior Appropriations Bill directing the U.S. Forest Service to conduct a below-cost timber sales study in the Shawnee.
In the years that they have been cutting in the Shawnee National Forest, the cost of permitting that activity in the forest has been greater than the money realized in the timber sales.
The House passed a measure that would have banned nearly all logging in the Shawnee, but a Senate version approved in September was substantially weaker, forcing the need for a compromise bill. The compromise allows logging in sections of no more than 3/5 of an acre. It does ban all clear cutting, except in emergency cases. Environmentalists say the compromise is proof that big timber companies are running.
Protesters say the fight isn't over.
They've got the guns and they've got the heavy equipment and they've got all the money to bring in all this law enforcement, and we've just got the people and our spirit.
Another battle line's been drawn in the Shawnee National Forest, this time in a place called Burner Hill.
Burner Hill is the last 100-year-old corridor in Alexander County. Alexander County has been stripped since the late 60s.
Already, trees are marked for the cut. Activists say the recent cutting in the Fairview woodlands is peanuts compared to what's going to happen here. Activists say the cutting in Burner Hill is nearly 10 times as large as that at Fairview.
We just got a bill through the Congress that says the Forest Service shall work with East Perry to remark old timber sales. They're calling the new way of cutting gap phase dynamics, smaller openings. But when you're in the last 100-year-old corridor, small openings are too much.
Activists in the Shawnee Defense Fund say they aren't ruling anything out in the Battle of Burner Hill, but they hope it will be less dramatic than Fairview.
Don't want to have to see the dozers come and a 3-week armed encampment there at Fairview by Forest Service law enforcement officers. That's a waste of taxpayers' money.
Activists are unclear of what action they'll take next, but they said they will be here to confront East Prairie Lumber Company and the Forest Service every step of the way.
2 months ago, several environmentalists were arrested during protest at the Fairview timber area where hundreds of acres were cut down. And today, one protester climbed to a treetop to state his message.
I hope that people who see this and can see the canopy above me and around me can realize the power of this canopy, the power of these trees, and that this is not something that can be regrown in a few years.